moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy. No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
Are you ready to reach for the stars? Tune in to The Lost Wanderer, the #1 monthly podcast on good pods in astronomy. Join our host, Jeff, as he takes you on an interstellar adventure to explore the mysteries of space and the wonders of science. From rocket launches and distant galaxies to the latest discoveries in astronomy, each episode is a thrilling ride through the cosmos. Don't just gaze at the stars. Come explore the universe with us. Follow The Lost Wanderer wherever you get your podcasts, and let's discover the stars together.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Not to be a backseat driver, but can you say for sure you got the best monthly payment possible on your auto loan? Could it be that you might have gotten a better deal by shopping the loan at a few places and have a lower car payment? Next time, before you go car shopping, visit Communication Federal Credit Union first. Our auto loan experts will find you a perfect loan and get you the lowest monthly payment we can. Communication Federal, your auto loan experts. Restrictions apply. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure as the general manager of KLR Radio to welcome you to our newest offering here on our humble little site, known as Corin's Reading Room, hosted by none other than Corin Nimick himself. And without further ado, here he is.
Oh boy, what's happening? How is everybody? That music that you heard was by Most Jackson. And this is very new to me. What my idea here is that I'm going to grab some books off of my bookshelf, which is out in the living room. But I got this little doozy today, and it's by Paul Foster Case. It is the Masonic letter G, and as I was thumbing through it a little while ago, I realized that it's a pretty steep gradient. I recall when I read this, a while back, it was, I get it quite easily, but it's got some complexities to it that I sort of forgot about. But what I do when I read any books is I just, underline some of the items in it that I find to be of interest to me. So I figure that, I can kind of go through that. We can talk about it a little bit. I write some annotations in it, some ideas that I have. I might read those. But mainly my interest in Masonic philosophy is just it's quite compelling to me to look into what it is that they that Masons think, and what is their philosophical point of view when it comes to life and living and who we are as individuals. And obviously the letter G is used in their iconic symbol, which has the square and the compass with the letter G in the middle of it. And the letter G stands for geometry. Geometry is used as a symbol for the language that the grand architect of the universe uses in order to communicate and also to create the living universe that we're in. But and I found this particular book, very interesting. I'll just read a little bit of the introduction here. I might read the whole introduction, but it's pretty short. But Paul Foster Case, who was born in 1884, died in 1954, author of this treatise, is known to students of occultism as the outstanding authority of tarot, Kabbalah, alchemy, and related subjects of the Western occult tradition. His other publications, including The True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order, Tarot, Key to the Wisdom of the Ages, The Great Seal of the United States, which is a fantastic book, The Magical Language, The Book of Tokens, bear witness to his deep insight and wonderfully readable approach to these subjects. The present work makes it clear that his knowledge, including a thorough understanding of the Masonic tradition. In it, he develops the unmistakable link that exists between the Masonic degrees and rituals and the Kabbalistic tradition. He shows that Masonry cannot be fully appreciated or understood without knowledge of the Kabbalistic tree of life and its insights into the true nature of man and the cosmos. So I'll stop right there. I suggest anybody who's interested in this kind of subject just Google this particular book, Paul Foster Case, The Masonic Letter G, and order a copy of it. It's quite interesting. In 1717, the Grand Lodge was established at the Apple Tree Tavern in London. That's argued. There's another tavern. I forget the name of it right offhand, but some people say that it was started at this other place. But the Apple Tree Tavern was in a rather rowdy part of town back then. And G, as I said, is the initial of geometry. The heart of Freemasonry is an esoteric doctrine founded in the science of geometry. Masonry and geometry are one and the same. So what they mean by that is that in what's called speculative masonry, which is there's operative masonry. So back in the day, previous to the 1717 date, there were operative Masonic lodges, which were kind of like workers' unions in a way, and the operative lodges had basically two degrees. They had your apprentice and your master degree as a carpenter, or in this case, as a stonemason. That's the guilds that Freemasonry came out of were really kind of the stonemasons, not so much some of the other guilds. There were many guilds back then, but the second degree. So you have entered apprentice, you have fellow craft, and you have master mason. Those are the three degrees. But in the back in the day, before you got speculative masonry, which is masons who are interested in the philosophical side of practical building, and the architectural design that goes into it and all of that. They those degrees, basically your fellow craft degree, your second degree, you achieved by becoming a journeyman. So you'd apprentice underneath the master mason for upwards of 7 years or so, and then you'd go off and you'd work on different building projects all over kind of the known world back then. Masons in the guilds were allowed a kind of freedom of travel that many other people didn't have. So they could end up working on projects not just in Great Britain, but also over on mainland Europe and other places, even into the Middle East and such. But so G as the initial letter of geometry. The heart of Freemasonry is an esoteric doctrine founded on the science of geometry. Masonry and geometry are one and the same. G is the symbol for the deity. So God is the English name of the grand architect of the universe. There's some interesting aspects of the word God that we might that we'll get into here in a moment. So the letters composing the English name of deity should be the initials of the Hebrew words wisdom, strength, and beauty. The three great pillars, the metaphorical supports of Masonry. So the three pillars are in the tree of life, which is, I believe that there is a diagram of it in here. If not, I probably drew one, but I'm pretty sure there is. But the tree of life is a geometrical pattern that has 10 what's called sephirot, or you could call them ciphers. And then it has 22 different paths that connect them. So it looks like this right here, if you can see that. Let me get my lighting right. So it looks like that. And in the Scottish Rite tradition, you have these 10 sephirot and the 22 paths, which when combined gives you the number 32, 10 plus 22. And the primary degrees in Scottish Rite are 32 degrees, with a 33rd degree, which is it's not really a degree that has a it's one that is bestowed upon someone who is a high degree Scottish Rite Freemason. And I don't do the Scottish Rite degrees myself, so I'm not really that interested in them. But that's where the 32 degrees of Scottish Rite come from. And then the 33rd is one that's bestowed upon you for your work that's done, whether it be charitable work. Let's say you've done a lot with the Shriners, or you've done a lot in your local community, or you've become a scholar of Masonry, or you've done whatever it is that you've accomplished in your life. If you've had a series of great accomplishments, then many times you'll be bestowed with that 33rd degree. But so the letter G here, let's see, we go back on page 16 is where I'm at. And again, I'm just reading over the parts that I just underline a little bit, so that we're not doing like a full book reading here. So if you are interested in this, I suggest getting the book. But on the letters that compose the name of God, you have the Hebrew word for beauty is gomer, which is the G. Strength is Oz, which is the O, whence the English O. And then D is the initial of Dabar, which means wisdom. So you have Gomer, Oz, and Dabar. So strength, beauty, and wisdom. And it's an interesting interpretation, because the Old English or old I believe it's the old Germanic term, which the word God comes from, is got, which means to invoke. So it's like an invocation. So anytime you're doing a religious ritual or a prayer, you're praying or you're meditating or doing anything like that, there's an invocation that's going on internally for for a connection to this higher power, this greater source of wisdom. And again, that's where we get the idea of the G for geometry. Some people have made the claim that the G stands for gnosis, which is similar to the idea of an invocation, but it doesn't stand for gnosis. But it is interesting. But so Masonry, the supports of the lodge are always named in the following order: wisdom, strength, and beauty. These are the three pillars. Not only the three pillars on the tree of life, which are the left, the center, and the right paths when you go straight up the tree of life, but also you could say a valuable interpretation of the word God in terms of it being spelled G-O-D, which I do find interesting. But Dabar, the final letter in the word God, is his true signification is word, speech, order, or command. And Gomer is the Hebrew for to end or to cease to be, and Oz, the Hebrew word signifying strength. So Hebrew Kabbalah, employed in combination with wisdom and beauty, and is the word Geburah. Now, some of this is, again, like I said, it can get over your head, but I'll try and simplify some things as I go through. I just always found this particular book interesting. The Roman letters are simply modified Greek. Both Greek and Hebrew adaptations of Semitic original alphabet, and he suggested it was probably Phoenician, but there's some interesting theories about where the Phoenicians actually came from and who they were. They were the boat peoples who raided all of the coasts in ancient times. I don't know how far back that was. I can't recall right offhand. I feel like it might have been somewhere around 1200 BC or earlier. I'm lost by it. I probably could Google it real quick though. But also in G in the Greek is the gamma, and it's the initial of the Greek name for the same science. And that G is the English equivalent of the Hebrew letter Gimel. And interestingly enough, also Gimel is called the camel, and the Hebrew letter represents the camel. And there's an interesting correlation with the idea of the camel for like the Bedouin or someone in ancient times being their beast of burden. And so when you look at it as an analogy, you could say that the human body itself is the beast of burden for the spiritual being, meaning that passing through life, it's the human form that takes the brunt of the force of livingness, whatever injuries or whatever pain and circumstances or whatnot. Whereas the spiritual being essentially is immune from all of that, if you believe in in a spiritual being or not. Some people don't. Some people just believe that they're just this thing, this personality that lives in this meat body and lives and dies, and there's nothing more extraordinary about it. But to me, I think that there is. So he goes on in here and talks about how the G, the initial letter of God, G, in Greek is also equivalent to Gaia, which was the earth mother and the eldest born of chaos, whose name is the root of the noun geometry or geometria. And I find that interesting. I mean, the idea that when you talk about Gaia, the earth mother, so to speak, I think that's a real oversimplification of the idea that the planet itself is a living entity. It has a consciousness of its own, in a sense. There's a new trend that's happening now where people are hooking up these little sensors and stuff to plants and different organic life, and it sends out these frequencies that are very melodic. So there's a communication that's happening there. And it's interesting too, there's a book I read called The Cosmic Serpent. I might use that book one time on the show too. But in The Cosmic Serpent, this anthropologist went down to live with the ayahuasqueros in the Amazon, and he was asking them how they learned how to make the ayahuasca, which is their drink that they take that puts them in this this hyper conscious state where they're kind of interdimensional in a sense, kind of like a psychedelic mushroom trip or something of that nature. But when he asked them how they figured out the recipe for it, basically, or how they also knew what the properties were of all of the different plants that they use for different medicinal purposes and dietary purposes, the ayahuasqueros basically told him that the plants communicated that to them, that they talked to the plants, and I found that very interesting, because if they're if we are on this planet that has a consciousness of its own, on a grand scale, that we should be able to tune into that consciousness and tune into what it is it's trying to communicate to us. In fact, my acting teacher for many many years, over a decade, Manu Tupo at the American Repertory Company in Hollywood, he had an incredible exercise he would have the actors do called a communion with nature. And he was a Fijian fellow from the royal family in Fiji. He was a prince of a royal family. There might be a couple of royal families in Fiji, but he was a prince from the Fijian royal family down there. And they had a lot of ceremonies and things that they would do. And his mother had a ritual that she would do when she would go out and feed these sharks in the water and stuff. And it used to really freak him out. And later on in life, you realize that there was a communication that he had forgotten about when he came to the West and started teaching, becoming an actor, and then teaching and living this very westernized lifestyle, that he had disconnected from that subtle, sublime communication that we can have with nature itself. So he had us go out. We'd find some place in nature that was isolated from the material world, and we would sit there and we try to just vibe what our environment was communicating to us, and we would take notes on it and everything. We'd have to come back into class and share these. And his whole point behind it was to get us out of the mechanistic mindset and reconnect us with a much more kind of ancient way of communicating with our environment. And I found it just really revelatory. It was fascinating, and I did many of them, some pretty extraordinary experiences I had doing that. So if we have this idea that there is this so-called feminine entity that is all expansive and contains the entirety of the planet, and it emanates this life force out of it, which the whole planet is alive. We can all agree with that, right? But if there's a consciousness to it as well, that's quite interesting, and also then you would say that the masculine identifier, the opposite of that, would be the universe. So that the heavens, the universe itself, would have its own consciousness, and these two things would play off of each other back and forth. So you would, as somebody who practices these kind of meditative techniques, the whole idea is to disconnect from the lower self, the lower world, and connect up with something that's greater and more grand than anything that we can ever imagine. And then we realize, oh well, we are connected to that. So it's similar to when you're out in nature, and you can kind of feel that there's a different vibe when you're just completely isolated from the machine world, and you're out there with just, granted, it can be dangerous out in nature too, let's not forget, but it is fascinating. There is a different vibe. Anybody out there who's into hiking or camping or any of that, I think that all of us can agree that there's definitely a different resonance that occurs when we're out there. And I'm seeing some folks on here as well. I just want to acknowledge that and say hi to everybody. I'm really glad you're tuning in, and I hope somebody gets something out of this. This was the only idea I could come up with for a podcast. What can I tell you? So also, so the idea of the square and compass in Freemasonry is that the square itself, that represents the physical universe. You use the square to measure the physical universe, and the compass is the spiritual universe. It circumscribes. It's the round part of the square. So there's an analogy of the squaring of the circle, which you see in what's called the Vitruvian Man, or the Figure of Man by Leonardo da Vinci, where you have this man whose arms are are up at two different angles, and his legs are at two different angles, and there's a square and a circle around him, and that's the manifestation of the spiritual universe into physical reality. So when you can take spiritual ideals and you can implement them in your daily living, and that's it's very Buddhistic, I believe, very Zen. And so when it comes to understanding Freemasonry, the letter G and all of that, there you do have to have a some kind of rudimentary understanding of Kabbalah. Now, I did study at the Kabbalah Institute for a short time out in Los Angeles, but I've read quite a number of books on it, and I'll get into those at some point later on in the podcast, if I can survive this, if I'm not scoriated by the public.
All right. I don't normally drop in that much when I'm producing, but from the feedback I'm seeing in the chat, everybody's loving it. So just keep going.
Okay, cool, man. Thank you for the accolades, my friend. You're welcome to chime in anytime you like. So the tree of life, the circles represent 10 aspects or phases of the divine emanation. So those were the 10 sephirot that I mentioned to you on there. You see that right there. You can also Google the tree of life if you want to take a peek at it and look at it. So those are called the sephirot or numerations, and the 22 lines are said to represent the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the forces corresponding to those letters, and that makes up the whole tree. And it represents the 32 paths of wisdom. So Kabbalists say that this tree contains 3 pillars. That is the pillar of mercy, and then you have on the that's the right side. On the left side, you have the pillar of strength, and then in the center, you have the pillar of beauty. And again, it's interesting that also comes out to become the word God. So whether the etymological derivation of the word God coming from the old Germanic Gott, or this being the case, it's a grand mystery that I'm happy to never actually find the true story on, because the mystery is always more interesting. But let me continue on, find some stuff that's not quite as confusing. So all the mysteries of Freemasonry are synthesized in the 3 primary degrees: entered apprentice, fellow craft, and the master mason. And the number letter system of Kabbalah is the key that unlocks this essential mystery. The Hebrews, the Greeks, when the Bible was composed, neither nation knew anything of the Arabic numerals. They employed the letters of their alphabet to represent numbers. The first 9 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are the digits from 1 to 9. The next 9 are the tens from 10 to 90, and the last 4 letters stand for the hundreds from 100 to 400. And then there's some 5 special forms for higher numerations, but so you only have 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, is what I'm getting at there. But the Greek alphabet contained 24 letters, and it had a similar. I'm not going to read all of that, but it had a similar kind of thing where each of those letters are representing a number, and so you have gematria, or gematria, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is a evaluation to words that people, kind of glean higher knowledge or information on, because some words will have the same numerical value as other words, and depending on what letters are used to make them up. And this also gets into that idea that the grand architect of the universe speaks through geometry, which is represented essentially by numbers, you can say. And so that the idea that even the ability to have an alphabet is something divine. So at some point, when we go back into ancient history, and the first tribe of man out there that suddenly came up with this idea, like, hey, man, all this mumbo jumbo, we can come up with symbols that represent the sounds that we're making and combine them in different ways. So whether that was, done in some fashion that was using a mathematical equation for it or not, by vibing whatever the thing was and giving it a name, so that we have a better understanding and we could differentiate between. So we call one thing a tree, but there's how many different kinds of trees out there, so what is each one of the different trees? That's in the runes. The runes all represent these different trees as well. So it's like which was the alphabet of the Gauls, and there's some interesting correlations between that kind of Gaulish alphabet, or the alphabet of the tribes of ancient Europe, and the islands off the coast there. So with some of the alphabets that we find in the Middle East, and how those were interchanged is very interesting, because there was always trade between these different peoples, these different tribes, dating way back in history. I have another interesting book about some of those subjects, and oddly enough, in ancient Egypt, this is pre-BC. Psychedelic mushrooms were more pricey than gold back then, and the only place that you could really get those was from the European nations. Well, I mean, that area of landmass. I obviously didn't call it Europe back then, but so there was a trade that was going on, in ancient times, which I find very interesting. But so again, it says the real signification of a word or phrase might be discovered from the numeral value. So you could read one word and have a numerical value, then find the numerical value of another word and figure out that there's some correlation between the two, for instance. And it says this is what occurred in the composition of many passages in both the Hebrew of the Old Testament and the Greek of the New Testament. So a lot of people not a lot of, certain individuals who are interested in that subject matter have delved very deeply into the Old Testament and even the New Testament in the Hebrew and Greek. And when you take away in the Old Hebrew, when you take away all of the accents and things like that then and you collapse all the letters just into each other, supposedly there's like an algorithm. There's this mathematical equation that goes through the entire the entire Old Testament, and apparently it's quite revelatory. I don't know enough about it to really dive too deep into it, and math is I was pretty good at it when I was young, but I stopped using it after I graduated 12th grade. I mean, I stopped using higher math. When you go to the grocery store, you don't need calculus to figure out how much a price of eggs is, except for recently. But it does say here, like for instance, then there's an interesting correlation here. It says the Roman Emperor Nero, the rabbinical Hebrew of that period as Neron Kaiser, added up to 666. So that was quite interesting when you look at the correlation between numbers and names. And you could certainly say that Nero was, for his time period, could have been considered the beast of Revelations. But let's see. Let's get on to this. So various numbers and measures mentioned in the Old Testament are clues to an inner meaning. Turn the numbers into words and phrases. Gematria stands for the writers of both sections of the Bible to conceal. Enabled. I'm sorry. Gematria enabled the writers of both sections of the Bible to conceal geometrical formulas and measurements by means of words and phrases. For the Hebrews, the Sanctum Sanctorum was the actual dwelling place of the divine presence, or the Shekinah, which rested on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. As the Ark was placed in the Holy of Holies, the position of the mercy seat coincided with the interior center of that cubical room. Thus, the place of divine presence was at the center, or in the midst. Now, in Freemasonry, they they talk about the building of King Solomon's temple, and the architect of King Solomon's temple, a gentleman named Hiram Abiff. But whether that individual really existed in the sense that he was the real architect or not is besides the point. It's more of the allegory. But the idea is that in speculative masonry, you're using the working tools of operative masons. So the hammer, the chisel would be used to, you'd be chipping away at what's called the rough ashlar and creating a perfected stone. And in the same sense that you're using that to chip away at your own deficiencies, your own character defects and personality traits that aren't creating a positive outcome for ourselves, and by using the metaphorical hammer and chisel, you can recognize and reflect in a meditative state about the aspects of one's own personality that they're not digging, that isn't helping them as far as their survival goes. And you can hone and chip away at those and perfect them. And so like the square, for instance, you want to square your actions in life with other people. You would use the compasses to circumscribe your desires. So you want to keep your your desires for things in life down to a very tight minimum. What is needed most to survive and live a good life and be a good person. So um, the use of these working tools, which I might get into a little bit more later. I actually have a whole little section in the book that I wrote, creating a character for the stage or life. Maybe we'll get into that sometime on here. But there's a whole section in there where I talk about how you can apply the working tools to your life. But and the whole point behind that, when in reading this one little section, is the holy of holies, the innermost part of our being, the sanctum sanctorum. That's this place deep within ourselves. So the idea of building the temple within is what I'm getting at. So the use of these working tools of the operative mason, the person who actually builds churches, cathedrals, buildings, whatever else. You can use the same tools that they use, but internally, in order to try and build the best character for yourself, so that you have the best outcome for your experience in this life, and you can be the best representation you can make of yourself as an individual. Um, so the presence was at the center or in the midst. So the presence was at the center, in the midst of this sanctum sanctorum. That's when, and I studied at the Taoist Institute of Los Angeles for a little while as well. And in the meditation, they talk about getting to that point where you're just resonating with your true self, with your beingness. Beingness doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have a complex makeup of all of the things that we've learned in life, all of our experiences, our reactive nature, and all of that kind of stuff. It doesn't have all of those trappings. This is a programming that we undergo, living our lives by, depending on, what was our family like, what religion were we born into, what neighborhood did we grow up in, what schools did we go to, what language did we learn. All of these different aspects of life slowly start to create a sort of predetermined version of ourselves, which in Buddhism would be like that would be like the great lie, this idea that you believe you are who you think you are, when in reality you're no thing. And it's that somethingness of nothing, and that nothingness of something, which is the great mystery. So how do we detach ourselves from this pre-programmed way of being and perceiving ourselves, because we say, well, I am who I am. My name is Corin Nemec. I'm an actor. I grew up primarily in Hollywood, and this is my life experience. But if I'm able to stop that and wipe that slate clean, again, in my acting class, it was called the blank slate. My teacher was very much into a Buddhistic approach to acting, which I found very fascinating. And so the idea was to drop everything we ever thought of ourselves or believed about ourselves in order to create a blank slate. So then when we become a new character, acting wise, when we're generating a character, we have all of this room to introduce new intricacies, new nuances, new character traits that aren't organic to our pre-programmed personality. And it was very freeing to get a load of that. When I first started studying with him in my early 20s, I wasn't really cognitive of this idea that I wasn't necessarily who I thought I was, and that was kind of mind blowing to go, wait a minute, I don't have to be me. And, it sounds a little strange, but it was very true to me. It's like, I can let go of all of these things I'm hanging on to try and prove that I am who I am. And I don't have to do that. I can just be. And I equate this too to, like, we got this great pet, Theo, our corgi, our wonderful corgi. And what's so special about him? My teacher used to say this too about pets. Is like, it's their beingness. They're just being, and I just love this guy, fascinated with him. And he's just there, just being, and I think that there's a state of mind that we can also join forces with, that is more of a beingness than a doingness, or like a pattern of behavioral actions that we take, because we're taught or told or learned that that's how we react. That in this situation, this is how I react because this is who I am and this is what I was taught. When in reality, all of that can be stopped, and a whole new way of dealing with a situation in life can be generated organically without being reactive. So the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of formation, it's a very interesting little book too. It says right here, which says that the place of God is the interior center from which radiate the six boundless lines establishing space and sealed with the six permutations of the divine name Yeho. A cube is a solid bounded by six equal faces and 12 equal lines. The lines form right angles, horizontals, and perpendiculars, and they meet at 8 external points. Thus, the numbers required to define a cube are 6, 8, and 12, whose sum is 26, the numeral value of the ineffable name Yahweh. So Yahweh is Yod He Vav He, which is the tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God, which apparently, is not really pronounced correctly. It's not, there is no, the true name of God was lost, and this was just a kind of a placeholder for it. And what's also is interesting about the letters of Yod He Vav He, if you stack them up on top of each other, they create a form. Hey, look, there's the little guy. He heard me talking about him.
Say Theo. I see Theo.
Yeah. So if you stack them on top of each other, it creates this little like stick figure of a man called Adam Cadman. It's like the primordial idea of man before it's manifested in a physical form. And I look at that in the sense that, we all have this blank slate, he's going to steal all my thunder in the background there. I know he is. Everybody's gonna be like, look at him, he's so cute. Forget what this guy's saying. Look at that dog. But just the idea of man before it's manifest. And so you could say that, like, a higher self version of us would be an individual who is not subjected to the reactionary state of behavior that they can generate a new and vivid expression for themselves on a daily basis, every morning, waking up, realizing that this is a new opportunity and a new moment to be the best that I can be. And oddly enough, like when you talk about like Zen Buddhism or Taoism, that the idea is to not, in the sense, not be, and by not being, you then become just the resonance, the resonance of the true spiritual entity that you are inside, and without all of the complexities of personality again, so how all of that filters through our behavior. At a certain point, we can become so fixated on the ego self that's what we become, and we're no longer connected to the idea of a higher self. You're right there. He wants to play ball with me. No, sir. I'm in the middle of a podcast here, man. You're stealing my thunder.
He's like, but I'm just being. So
Yes, he
be
is.
with
He
me.
is. He's being wonderful, is what he is. And so this is it's a very unique concept, and so that it's like basically, you could say that the letter G is, in a way, is the individual, is the true self, is the spiritual being, and then we have our higher form, which is the compasses, and then the lower form, which is our which is the square. That's our actions and our behaviors. And you always want to try and behave the best that we can to all things. And again, that's what I was saying about with nature too. It's like, how can we live in some kind of balance with nature, and I mean, I think about it often. It's not that I have so much power to do anything about it, but so often when I'm going on road trips or whatever, and I'm going through the death zones in the middle of the woods, where there's just like carcasses just strewn left and right as you drive down the street, of all these poor animals that are just trying to get from one side of the woods to the other. And there's a few places that I've been past that will have these kind of nature overpasses, and animals are smart enough to figure out that that's the safe way to go. They are little sentient creatures, but when they're given no option to get from one side of the road to the other, except for the thunderous death trap of traffic, that's what they got to do. And that's just one of those things where I think, like, as human beings, like, can't we design our world to be a little bit more in balance with nature, and so that we can vibe with Gaia, so to speak, and think, well, let's see, what would the Earth do in this situation, right? So the Hebrew letter, the Hebrew name of God, Yahweh, this Yod Heh, is very interesting. The Yod is basically kind of it looks kind of like a hand. It's each one of the letters sort of represents a different part of the body too, but it's also like the eye, like an eye, is, or the head itself. And then the next letter, He, which is the upper body, the Vav, the internal organs, the center of the body, the torso, and then the last letter, He or He, is the legs. And this would be kind of the physical representation of the etheric form. It manifests as this thing, but there's a driving force behind it that is that's far more interesting and fascinating and expressive than the human form can be. But we have the ability to filter that cosmic energy into our actions, and that's I think why artists can be so incredible. And it doesn't mean that just because you might be an incredible painter, an incredible actor, an incredible singer, an incredible architect, an incredible whatever the case may be, it doesn't mean that you're a good person. And I think that the greatest art form that anybody can achieve out there is goodness, humbleness, and kindness to others in the greatest capacity that we can achieve. That to me is the ultimate art. The ultimate art is how do I design my expression in life through how do I behave to people. If I woke up and I had a really crappy day, do I take that crappy day to the grocery store and treat the person who's checking me out bad, or the person who's blocking the aisles with their, while they're looking for which brand of peanut butter they want? Take it out on them, or do I get road rage and traffic, or all of these things? That all of that can go away just by the conscious, attack, the conscious effort to not be reactive, so to speak. But let's see. Let me find some other interesting parts of this. And so here we go. Sorry, here the second Hebrew word. Let's see. The Hellenic logos, where the logos is the word of God, so to speak, by Philo Judaeus, the doctrine of the Pythagoreans and Platonists, and it has its roots in their mathematical philosophy. Thus, it is not unreasonable to suppose that St. John was acquainted with this number philosophy and had it in mind when he wrote, "God is love." For since love and one are the words of the same value, 13, to say God is love is Kabbalistically equivalent to the fundamental doctrine of Judaism. So Yehovah Echad, God is one. So that would mean that they both have the same numerical value of the number 26, for instance. It's also interesting that the English alphabet has 26 letters in it, which is the numerical equivalent to the word Yahweh when you get the number 26. And I was kind of curious about that over the years too, if that was something that was that was intentional or unintentional. But because the idea of structuring language through the written word and all of that, there is a divine origin to it. That's what separates, or supposedly separates, man from beast, is this idea that we have a level of intelligence or a level of sentience that can operate on a higher plane than the average animal. But I don't know if anybody's ever seen a beaver build a dam. I gotta say, those guys are geniuses. But or an ant hill. I mean, the inner workings of ant hills, and if we ever look at a beehive, my goodness, there's some serious geometrical form to that. But let me dive into let me flip the pages here. So in early speculative Freemasonry, the Bible is the trestle board. A trestle board is a board where you draw your designs and the shapes for the things that you want to build on it, and then you have the ability to match that. They would actually have these gigantic kind of like well, you can call it a chalkboard, but they would draw out like the piece that they need to create, and then you could hammer and chisel it away or cut it away, with wood, and then you could place it on top of what you drew and get the exact dimensions and make sure that you're true and correct. So, as the operative artist erects his temporal building in accordance with the rules and designs laid down on the trestle board by the master workman, so should be erect that spiritual being, of which the material is a type, in obedience to the rules and designs, the precepts and commands laid down by the grand architect of the universe in those great books of nature and revelation, which constitute the spiritual trestle board of every Freemason. The trestle is a framework for a table. In Scotch trest, the trestle board is a board placed for convenience of drawing on the frame. The trestle board shows the plans of an architect. Such plans are based on the principles of geometry. So again, even in the blank slate of our own minds, the mind can become so jumbled and so filled with all of these thoughts and ideas and pre-programmed beliefs and and things that we dislike about ourselves, or things that we're so hyped up about ourselves that we have this impenetrable ego about about who we think we are. Who don't you know who I am? That kind of thing. And it's like when somebody from city council gets pulled over by the cops and they're like, "You're giving me a ticket? Don't you know who I am?" But no, I don't know who you are, actually. That's the whole point. And the less that we can know who we are, I think, is a benefit. So, and again, we see the name Gimel, which means camel. I talked to you about that earlier, and I'll just read this whole part here. If one asks himself, what is the fundamental idea brought to mind by the picture of a camel, he will not be long in concluding that camels, to ancient Hebrews, represented just what automobiles suggest to the modern mind, namely travel, journeying to places far off, and the like. Thus, the camel is a symbol of that mark of the master mason, the ability to travel in foreign countries. The whole work of the craft, in fact, may be summed up in this one word, travel, of which the camel is a symbol. And Masons speak of themselves as traveling east in search of light. Their quest is thus indicated as being a search for origins and causes. For the west is the place of the sunset. Thus, it represents the end of the cycle of work or manifestation. So these these analogies are just are ideas to be able to think with, and in a Western context, because it seems like that the Westernized mind is much more mechanistic, and when you can use these kind of mechanistic analogies, then for me, I believe that it can shift the sort of Westernized, materialistic minded, way of thinking into thinking in more cosmic and spiritual principles, or dynamics. And that's why the idea of the working tools in masonry are so great, to be able to apply to life. And again, I'll probably get into more of that if I dive into this at some point. But you can get this on lulu.com. Just go to lulu.com. That's lulu.com and search Corin Nimick, or search the title. That's my selling voice. So the idea of traveling east, this is, where the sun rises, the sun itself is used as a symbol in ancient Rome. They called it Sol Invictus, which was the invincible sun. And that this was not, it was understood that the sun itself, without the light of day, without its the properties of the sun, you could not have any type of living organism on planet Earth. Without this interaction between the sun and the planet itself, because its heat and its resonance, it's causing the planet to react to it, and life comes of that. So obviously, you need some water too. I need lots of water, but the sun itself represents this light, this internal light. When you internalize the idea of what it means, what it represents, is the light that shines from within, and that is this spiritual being, the true self, which is just a resonance. In theoretical physics, they talk about superstring theory, which is this theory that when you get to the tiniest form of any molecule, any atom, all of when you get down to the smallest type form, it's just a vibrating string of energy, and depending on its resonance, it will become whatever it is that you're seeing. So a rock has a certain resonance, a tree has a certain resonance, wood, stone, water has a certain resonance, but at its tiniest level, it's all this vibrating loop of energy that is just that's either at a high pitch or low pitch or whatever in between. And I equate that like the spiritual being itself would be like this resonating loop of energy that just is in the cosmic mind, that we're all connected to. And that is the same with kind of the idea of the sun being this light. So when you're seeking the light, when you're traveling east, it means that you're looking for some type of information or revelation or something that will help to make that transition from being far more mechanistic in the way that we deal with life and relate to ourselves, and then becoming far more spiritual in essence. Wow, we've already knocked out almost an entire hour. That's crazy.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're hitting your wrap point. So why don't you
Yeah, we are.
Why don't you remind folks what the book is that you've been discussing and where they can find it if they decide they want to take a look, and you might want to let folks know where they can find
Yes,
it.
well, right now, really quickly, yes, we have reached the west, which is the end. That is where the sun sets, and we'll be setting right now on this particular quest for information about the Masonic letter G. And I barely got halfway through this book with all of that. I can really go on my own stream of thoughts here. Maybe we'll pick this up the rest of it next time, or maybe we'll grab something new. But again, you can look up Paul Foster Case, the Masonic letter G. Order this. I'm sure it's available out there somewhere. I got mine at an actual bookstore many, many, many years ago. And it's a great little read. And I hope that you go out there and find it and enjoy it yourself, like I've been enjoying it for many years. I'm Corin Nimick. This is Corin's Reading Room.
And where can folks find you, Mr. Nimick?
You can find me on at my name. I am the letter I and the letter M, and then my name, Corin Nimick, CorinNemec, and that's across all the platforms. I'm Corin Nimick.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for the inaugural episode of Corin's Reading Room. We hope you join us again next week. Stay tuned here on KLRN Radio. Up next, we have The Lost Wanderer. After that, we have Sunday Nights with Alan Ray. Plenty more content to come. So for those new faces we have around here, we hope you decide to stay and check out the rest of what we have to do. But if you're only here for Corin, I kind of understand. It's okay.